The phone call came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was watering my gardenias. I'm Dorothy Lambert, 71 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Charleston, South Carolina for 43 years. The house where I raised my daughter Rebecca, the house where my husband Frank died 5 years ago, the house I thought I'd leave to my family when the good Lord called me home. But that phone call changed everything. It was Sandra Mitchell from First Heritage Bank, the woman who'd handled my accounts for 20 years. Her voice was tight, professional, but I could hear the distress underneath. Mrs. Lambert, I'm calling because there's been some unusual activity on your accounts, specifically your trust accounts and your investment portfolio. Have you authorized any major transfers recently? I set down my watering can, my hands suddenly unsteady. Transfers? No, Sandra, I haven't authorized anything. What kind of transfers? Mrs. Lambert, over the past 6 months, there have been systematic withdrawals totaling just over $1.3 million from your various accounts. The transfers were all authorized with your power of attorney documentation, signed by your grandson, Blake Lambert. Blake, my precious grandson. The boy I'd raised after my daughter Rebecca died of breast cancer when he was only 8 years old. The young man I'd put through college, bought a car for, helped with his first house down payment. Blake, who'd convinced me 2 years ago to give him power of attorney so he could help me manage my finances as I got older. I felt the blood drain from my face. I sat down hard on my garden bench, the phone pressed against my ear. Sandra, I need you to freeze everything immediately. Every account. I'm coming to the bank right now. Mrs. Lambert, there's more. This morning, we received paperwork attempting to transfer your entire investment portfolio, approximately $2.5 million, into accounts at a different institution. The signature looked questionable to me, which is why I called you before processing it. Mrs. Lambert, I think your grandson is trying to steal your entire life savings. The drive to the bank was a blur. I'd raised that boy. After Rebecca died, when Blake's father disappeared rather than face the responsibility of single parenthood, I'd stepped in without hesitation. Frank and I had become his parents in every way that mattered. We'd given him love, stability, discipline, and every advantage we could afford, and now he was stealing from me. Sandra met me at the door of the bank, ushering me quickly into a private office. She laid out 6 months of bank statements, each one showing transfers I'd never authorized. 50,000 here, 75,000 there, amounts large enough to be significant but small enough that I might not notice immediately if I wasn't checking my statements carefully. And I hadn't been checking carefully. I'd trusted Blake completely. Mrs. Lambert, Sandra said gently, I need to ask you some difficult questions. When you signed the power of attorney giving Blake access to your accounts, did you understand the full scope of what you were authorizing? He told me it was just so he could help pay my bills if I got sick, help manage things if I couldn't do it myself. He said it was for my protection. Sandra's expression was grim. A properly structured power of attorney can be a useful tool for exactly those purposes, but Blake's access went far beyond bill paying. He has full authority to move assets, close accounts, make investment decisions. And based on what I'm seeing, he's been systematically draining your wealth for months. Can we reverse the transfers? Some of them possibly. But Mrs. Lambert, much of this money has already been spent. I did some research after I noticed the unusual activity. Blake purchased a luxury condominium in Miami 3 months ago. Cash purchase, $950,000. He bought a Tesla 2 months ago, paid in full. He's been taking trips to Las Vegas, staying at high-end hotels. Everything was paid for with your money. My vision blurred with tears, but I forced them back. I'd learned long ago that tears don't solve problems. Action solves problems. Sandra, I need you to help me understand something. If Blake has legal power of attorney, how do I stop him from taking everything? You revoke the power of attorney immediately. We'll file the paperwork today. Then you'll need an attorney to help you recover what's been stolen. Mrs. Lambert, I have to be honest with you. Even with the power of attorney revoked, proving that Blake acted fraudulently rather than just poorly is going to be difficult. He had legal authority to access those accounts. Unless we can prove he forged signatures or lied about your intentions, he may be able to keep much of what he's taken. The rage that swept through me in that moment was unlike anything I'd felt in my 71 years. Not the hot, explosive anger of youth, but something colder, more focused, more dangerous. Then I remembered something. Something Frank had told me in the final weeks before his death. Sandra, I said slowly, my mind racing. When my husband Frank died 5 years ago, he left very specific instructions about the structure of my estate. He worked with an attorney to create protections. I need to find those documents. Do you remember the attorney's name? Lawrence Brennan. He was Frank's best friend from law school. Sandra pulled out her phone. Lawrence Brennan is still practicing. He's one of the top estate attorneys in South Carolina. Mrs. Lambert, if your husband built protections into your estate structure, that could change everything. I drove directly from the bank to Lawrence Brennan's office. I hadn't seen Lawrence since Frank's funeral, but he greeted me with the warmth of old friendship and the sharp assessment of a skilled attorney. Dorothy, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Sandra Mitchell called to give me a heads up about what you're facing. I've been pulling Frank's files. Sit down, we have a lot to discuss. Lawrence was 74, still sharp as a tack, with white hair and the kind eyes of a man who'd seen every variety of human nature, good and bad. Dorothy, Frank was my closest friend for 50 years. In those final months, he was worried. Not about dying, he'd made his peace with that. He was worried about you being vulnerable after he was gone. He specifically asked me to build protections into your estate structure, protections that would activate if anyone tried to exploit you financially. What kind of protections? Lawrence opened a thick file folder. Frank created what we call a revocable living trust with specific safeguards. All of your major assets, the house, the investment accounts, the rental properties, are held in that trust. You're the trustee, which means you control everything during your lifetime. But Frank also named co-trustees, people who have oversight and can step in if there's evidence of exploitation or undue influence. Who are the co-trustees? Me for one, and your niece, Jennifer Carter. Frank chose Jennifer because she's financially independent, lives out of state, and has no direct claim to your estate. She's neutral but invested in your well-being. I don't understand. If the assets are in the trust, how did Blake get access to them? Lawrence's expression darkened. Because you gave him power of attorney over accounts that should have been restricted. Blake shouldn't have been able to touch the trust assets at all. The fact that he did means he either found a way around the trust structure, or, and he paused significantly, he convinced you to transfer assets out of the trust protection and into accounts he could access. I felt sick. Blake had been so persuasive 2 years ago. He'd told me that having everything in the trust was too complicated, that it would be easier for him to help me if we simplified the account structure. I'd trusted him. I'd authorized the transfers that moved nearly $2 million out of the protected trust and into regular accounts where his power of attorney gave him full access. I did exactly what Frank was afraid I'd do. I gave away the protections he'd built. Lawrence shook his head. Don't blame yourself, Dorothy. This is classic financial exploitation. Blake identified the protections, found your vulnerable point, which was your love and trust for him, and manipulated you into dismantling your own defenses. But here's what Blake doesn't know. What? Frank anticipated even that scenario. He built a second layer of protection. A clause in the trust documents that states if any trust assets are transferred out of the trust without the co-trustee's knowledge and approval, those transfers can be challenged and reversed. Additionally, any person who exercises undue influence to access trust assets can be removed as a beneficiary entirely and potentially face criminal charges for elder financial abuse. Can we use that clause now? Absolutely. But we need to act fast and we need to be strategic. First, we revoke Blake's power of attorney immediately. That paperwork is already drafted, you just need to sign. Second, we file a petition with the court to freeze all accounts and reverse the unauthorized transfers. Third, we file a criminal complaint with the State Attorney General's Office for Elder Financial Exploitation. South Carolina takes these cases very seriously. And fourth, we amend your will and trust to completely disinherit Blake and anyone who assisted him. Anyone who assisted him, you think someone helped him. Lawrence pulled out another document. Bank records show that some of the transferred money went to accounts jointly held by Blake and his girlfriend, Melissa Torres. She's been an active participant. She's visited the bank with Blake's signed documents. She's complicit. I'd met Melissa twice. A young woman in her late 20s, beautiful, charming, always looking at Blake with what I'd thought was adoration. Now I realized it was calculation. How long will all of this take? Months, possibly a year. Blake will fight back. He'll claim he had your permission, that he was managing your money with your full knowledge and consent. He'll try to paint you as a confused old woman who doesn't understand what she authorized. That's why we need to be meticulous. We need medical evaluations showing you're fully competent. We need witnesses who can testify to Blake's manipulation. We need to document every fraudulent transaction. I'll do whatever it takes, Lawrence. That boy took advantage of my love. He exploited my grief over Rebecca. He stole the security Frank worked 45 years to build for me. I won't let him get away with it. Lawrence smiled, a cold, satisfied smile. Frank told me if this day ever came, you'd fight. He said you were the strongest person he'd ever known, that you'd survived things that would have broken most people. He was right. We're going to get your money back, Dorothy, and we're going to make sure Blake faces consequences. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. Lawrence filed emergency motions to freeze Blake's accounts and prevent him from transferring or spending any more of my money. The court granted the motions, which meant Blake suddenly found himself cut off from the luxury lifestyle he'd been living on my dime. He called me 3 days after the accounts were frozen. I'd been expecting it, dreading it. "Grandma, what's going on? My accounts are frozen. The bank says you filed some kind of legal action against me. This has to be a mistake." His voice was so familiar, so achingly reminiscent of the little boy who'd cried in my arms after his mother died, but I forced myself to hear the manipulation underneath the concern. "It's not a mistake, Blake. I know what you've been doing. I know about the $1.3 million you've stolen. I know about the Miami condo, the Tesla, the Las Vegas trips, all paid for with money you took from my accounts without my knowledge or consent." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Harder, colder. "You gave me power of attorney, Grandma. You asked me to manage your money because you said you couldn't handle it anymore. I've been paying your bills, managing your investments. Everything I did was legal and authorized. You manipulated me into giving you that authority so you could rob me, Blake. And now you're going to give back every penny or you're going to prison." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Prison? Grandma, I'm your only grandchild. I'm the only family you have left. You're really going to send me to prison over money? Money you're just going to leave to me anyway when you die." The cruelty of those words, the casual assumption that my death was simply an inconvenience delaying his inheritance, took my breath away. "You're wrong about two things, Blake. First, you're not my only family. I have my niece Jennifer, and I have friends who have been more family to me than you've proven to be. Second, you won't be getting a single dollar of my money when I die. I'm changing my will today. Every penny I have will go to charity. You'll get nothing but the memory of how you betrayed the woman who raised you." I hung up before he could respond. That conversation was recorded, of course. Lawrence had advised me to record all interactions with Blake from that point forward. The recording would become crucial evidence. The legal discovery process revealed the full scope of Blake's theft. Lawrence's investigators found that Blake had been planning this for over 3 years, long before he'd convinced me to give him power of attorney. They found emails between Blake and Melissa discussing my finances, calculating how much they could take without triggering immediate suspicion. One email sent just 2 weeks after Frank's funeral made me physically ill. Blake had written, "The old lady is devastated about Frank. She's vulnerable right now, not paying attention to anything. This is our window. I'm going to start working on her to get POA within the year. Once I have that, we can start moving money. She's got at least 4 million, maybe more. If we're smart about it, we can drain most of it before she even realizes what's happening." Melissa's response. "What if she figures it out?" Blake's reply. "By the time she does, the money will be gone and will be untouchable. POA is legal authority. Even if she gets upset, there's nothing she can do. Old people sign these documents all the time and then regret it. The courts won't help her." He'd been wrong about that last part. The courts were helping me. But reading those emails, seeing the cold calculation with which my own grandson had planned to rob me, was almost more painful than the theft itself. Lawrence filed a comprehensive lawsuit 3 months after the initial freeze. The complaint detailed every fraudulent transaction, every manipulative conversation, every lie Blake had told. It demanded full restitution of the $1.3 million already taken, plus the $2.5 million he'd attempted to steal. It also sought punitive damages for elder financial abuse, a crime that carried serious penalties in South Carolina. Blake hired an expensive attorney, a slick Charleston lawyer named Preston Hughes, who specialized in defending white-collar criminals. Preston's strategy was exactly what Lawrence had predicted. Paint me as a confused elderly woman who'd willingly given Blake access to her money and was now suffering from regret and possible cognitive decline. The first deposition was scheduled for a cold morning in February, 6 months after I'd discovered the theft. I arrived at Preston's law office with Lawrence and Jennifer, my niece, who had flown in from Colorado to support me. Blake was already there, sitting at the conference table with Preston and Melissa. It was the first time I'd seen him in person since the phone call. He'd lost weight, looked haggard. Melissa, by contrast, looked defiant, almost angry that she was being implicated in what she clearly viewed as a family dispute. The deposition lasted 6 hours. Preston asked me hundreds of questions, trying to establish that I was mentally compromised, that I'd been confused about my finances, that I'd asked Blake to help me because I couldn't manage on my own. "Mrs. Lambert," Preston asked in his smooth voice, "isn't it true that after your husband Frank died, you felt overwhelmed by the complexity of your financial situation?" "I felt grief, Mr. Hughes. Grief is not incompetence. My husband and I had managed a complex investment portfolio for 40 years. His death didn't suddenly make me unable to understand money. But you did tell Blake that you needed help, correct?" I told him I would appreciate his help with small tasks, picking up prescriptions, helping with yard work. I never asked him to take control of my finances. He suggested that, and he was very persistent about it. Preston showed me the power of attorney document I'd signed. This is your signature, is it not? It is. And when you signed this, you understood what you were authorizing. I understood what Blake told me I was authorizing. He said it was a simple document that would allow him to pay my bills if I was hospitalized or unable to manage things temporarily. He never mentioned that it gave him the power to drain my bank accounts, sell my assets, or steal my life savings. Mrs. Lambert, Preston's voice took on a condescending tone. The document is very clear about the scope of authority. Are you saying you didn't read it before signing? I read it, Mr. Hughes, but I'm not an attorney. I relied on my grandson, someone I trusted completely, someone I'd raised as my own child, to explain it to me honestly. He lied. He intentionally misrepresented what the document meant so that I would sign it. That's called fraud, Mr. Hughes, and you know it. Lawrence suppressed a smile. I'd been well prepared for this deposition, and I wasn't going to let Preston paint me as a confused victim. The questioning continued, with Preston trying every angle. Had I been depressed after Frank's death? Yes, I'd been grieving. Had I been taking medications? Yes, blood pressure medication I'd been on for 20 years. Had I made any financial errors before giving Blake power of attorney? No, my accounts had been perfectly managed. Finally, Preston moved to his main argument. Mrs. Lambert, Blake has provided us with text messages and emails where you thanked him for his help managing your money. You expressed gratitude for his assistance. Doesn't that prove you knew what he was doing and approved of it? I thanked him for what I thought he was doing, which was helping me organize paperwork and pay routine bills. I didn't know he was transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars into his own accounts. I didn't know he was buying himself a luxury condo with my money. I didn't know he was taking his girlfriend on expensive vacations charged to my credit cards. Mr. Hughes, Blake is very good at presenting one face while doing something entirely different. That's what makes him so dangerous. Preston's expression hardened. He wasn't getting the confused, vulnerable grandmother he'd expected. Blake's deposition was 2 weeks later, and I insisted on being present. Lawrence had advised against it, said it would be emotionally difficult, but I needed to look Blake in the eye while he tried to justify what he'd done. Blake wore an expensive suit, one I realized with a sick feeling was probably purchased with my money. He avoided looking at me throughout the deposition. Lawrence began the questioning. Mr. Lambert, when did you first discuss obtaining power of attorney over your grandmother's finances? Blake cleared his throat. About 2 years ago. Grandma was struggling after my grandfather died. She asked me to help her. Can you provide any documentation of her asking you for help? Any email, text message, or written request? It was verbal conversations. She was emotional, overwhelmed. Lawrence slid a document across the table. This is a psychological evaluation of Mrs. Lambert conducted 1 month after her husband's death. It was part of her regular medical care. The evaluation shows no signs of depression, confusion, or impaired judgment. In fact, the psychologist noted that Mrs. Lambert was handling her grief with remarkable strength and clarity. Does that sound like someone who is overwhelmed and unable to manage her own affairs? Blake shifted uncomfortably. I just know what Grandma told me. She said she needed help. Let's talk about what you did with that help. Lawrence pulled out bank statements. In the first month after obtaining power of attorney, you transferred $53,000 from your grandmother's account into your personal account. What was that for? Blake glanced at Preston, who nodded. That was reimbursement for expenses I'd incurred helping Grandma. Home repairs, grocery shopping, things like that. $53,000 for groceries and home repairs in 1 month. Lawrence's voice was sharp. Mr. Lambert, Mrs. Lambert's credit card statements show she was buying her own groceries. Her bank records show she was paying her own bills. You weren't helping with routine expenses. You were stealing. I was managing her money like she asked me to. Lawrence laid out a series of documents. Let's go through some of these transactions. March 15th, $75,000 transferred to your account. What was that for? Investment opportunities I was managing for her. What opportunities? Be specific. Blake hesitated. I don't recall the specific investments. You don't recall because there were no investments, were there, Mr. Lambert? You simply took the money. Let's continue. April 22nd, $100,000. May 7th, $60,000. June 3rd, $95,000. Every single month, large transfers. Not one of them can you explain with any documentation or receipts. Preston interrupted. My client has already stated he was managing Mrs. Lambert's finances with her knowledge and approval. Lawrence ignored him, keeping his focus on Blake. Let's talk about the Miami condo. $950,000. Cash purchase. Did you tell your grandmother you were buying a luxury condo with her money? Blake's face flushed. That was going to be an investment property for the family. The deed is in your name only, not your grandmother's name, yours. How is that a family investment? It was always intended to be eventually transferred to her if she wanted it. Mr. Lambert, you listed that condo on a short-term rental platform at $5,000 per week. All the rental income went directly into your account. Not one penny went to your grandmother. How do you explain that? Blake's attorney spoke up again. We don't have to explain every financial decision. Mr. Lambert had broad authority to manage his grandmother's assets. Lawrence smiled coldly. Let me read you something, Mr. Lambert. This is an email you sent to your girlfriend, Melissa Torres, 2 months before you obtained power of attorney. Blake went pale. Lawrence read, I've been researching POA documents. Once I get Grandma to sign one, I'll have complete access to everything. She's sitting on $4 million, maybe more. She doesn't need that much money at her age. It's basically my inheritance anyway. I'm just accelerating the timeline. She'll never know the difference. That's taken out of context, Blake stammered. What context would make that statement acceptable, Mr. Lambert? What context makes it okay to view your grandmother's life savings as your inheritance while she's still alive? I was just venting. I was frustrated. You were planning theft. Premeditated, calculated theft of an elderly woman who trusted you completely. The deposition continued for 8 hours, with Lawrence methodically destroying every one of Blake's justifications. By the end, Blake was sweating, contradicting himself, unable to explain the obvious patterns of theft. But the most damaging moment came near the end, when Lawrence asked a simple question. Mr. Lambert, do you love your grandmother? Blake looked confused by the question. Of course I do. If you love her, why did you steal from her? I didn't steal. I was managing her assets. You bought yourself a luxury condo, a Tesla, took expensive vacations, all with her money. You didn't tell her about any of it. How is that love? Blake's composure finally cracked. She has more money than she needs. She's 71 years old. What's she going to do with $4 million? Let it sit in a bank. I'm her only grandchild. That money is supposed to be mine eventually anyway. The room went silent. Blake had just admitted exactly what we needed him to admit. He viewed my money as his inheritance, something he was entitled to take whenever he wanted. Lawrence let the statement hang in the air for a long moment. So you believe that because you're her grandson, you have the right to her money even while she's alive. Blake realized his mistake. That's not what I meant, but it is what you said, and it's clearly what you believe. No further questions. The deposition ended. As Blake and his attorney gathered their papers, I finally spoke, the first words I'd directed at Blake since that phone call months earlier. Blake, I said quietly. He looked up, startled. For 71 years, I've believed that family was the most important thing in the world. That blood mattered more than money. That love was what sustained us through hard times. You've taught me a painful lesson. Sometimes family is just people who know your weaknesses and exploit them. I hope the money was worth it, because you've lost something you can never get back. What's that, Grandma? Me? You've lost me. And you'll never get me back. His face crumpled for just a moment, and I saw something that might have been genuine remorse. But then Melissa touched his arm, whispered something to him, and his expression hardened again. They left without another word. Lawrence drove me home that evening. We were both exhausted from the long day of depositions. You did well, Dorothy. Blake's admission that he viewed your money as his inheritance is devastating to his case. Combined with the emails and the pattern of unauthorized transfers, we have overwhelming evidence of fraud and elder abuse. When will this go to trial? It won't. Lawrence glanced at me. After today's deposition, Preston will advise Blake to settle. Going to trial means putting all of this evidence in front of a jury. It means Blake potentially facing criminal charges. The Attorney General's office is already interested in prosecuting. Preston's smart enough to know Blake can't win in court. What kind of settlement? Full restitution at minimum. Every penny Blake took, plus interest. Additionally, we'll demand he surrender the Miami condo, the Tesla, and any other assets purchased with your money. He'll face a permanent injunction preventing him from ever accessing your accounts again. And you'll execute the new will that disinherits him completely. Will he go to prison? That depends on the Attorney General's office. They may decide to prosecute regardless of a civil settlement. Elder financial abuse is taken very seriously in South Carolina. Blake could face 5 to 10 years. Part of me, the part that had raised Blake, that had loved him as if he were my own son, flinched at the thought of him in prison. But the stronger part, the part that had been violated and betrayed, knew he deserved consequences. The settlement offer came 3 weeks later. Preston had clearly explained to Blake just how bad his situation was. The offer included everything we demanded: full restitution of $1.3 million, surrender of the Miami condo and Tesla, permanent prohibition from contact with me or my finances, and his agreement not to contest the new will. In exchange, we would recommend to the Attorney General's office that criminal prosecution not be pursued, citing Blake's cooperation and restitution. Lawrence presented the offer in his office. Dorothy, this is about as good an outcome as we could hope for. You'll get your money back, plus the value of the condo and car. Blake will face serious financial consequences. And you'll have legal protection preventing him from ever doing this again. Will he really learn anything from this, or will he just resent me for the rest of his life? Lawrence was quiet for a moment. I can't answer that. Some people learn from their mistakes, others just learn to be more careful next time. But Dorothy, that's not your responsibility. You've done everything a grandmother could do. You raised him, loved him, gave him every opportunity. He chose to betray that. His growth or lack of it is on him now. I signed the settlement agreement. Blake signed it 2 days later. The money was returned to my accounts within a week. The condo and Tesla were transferred to my ownership and immediately sold, with the proceeds going back into my trust. But the emotional cost of the betrayal couldn't be calculated in dollars. I spent weeks after the settlement in a kind of fog, going through the motions of daily life but feeling hollow inside. I'd won the legal battle, gotten my money back, protected my assets, but I'd lost my grandson. I'd lost the relationship I'd treasured for 25 years. My niece Jennifer stayed with me for 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized. She was wonderful, patient, and understanding without being pitying. Aunt Dorothy, she said one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, I know you're hurting, but I want you to think about something. The Blake you loved, the little boy you raised, that person may never have existed. Or if he did, he stopped being that person a long time ago. You didn't lose your grandson in this legal battle. You discovered who he really was. And discovering the truth, as painful as it is better than living with a comfortable lie. Her words resonated with me. She was right. I'd been mourning a relationship that had been false for years, maybe from the beginning, but I still had to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. I was 71 years old, financially secure again, but profoundly alone. Rebecca was gone, Frank was gone. Blake had proven himself to be a stranger wearing a familiar face. What did I have left? The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 months after the settlement, I received a letter from a woman named Patricia Morgan. She was 74 years old and lived in Columbia, South Carolina. Her letter explained that she'd read about my case in the newspaper, a brief article about elder financial abuse that had mentioned the lawsuit without using names, but with enough details that she'd recognized the story. Mrs. Lambert, Patricia wrote, I went through something similar with my nephew. He stole over $500,000 from me before I caught him. Unlike you, I didn't have the legal protections in place that allowed you to get your money back. I lost most of it, but what I lost that hurt more was my faith in family, my trust in people I loved. I'm writing because I want you to know you're not alone, and I want to propose something that might help both of us and many others. I called Patricia the next day. We talked for 3 hours. She was sharp, funny, and deeply passionate about preventing what had happened to us from happening to other seniors. Dorothy, she said, there are thousands of elderly people being exploited by their own families every year. Most of them never report it because they're ashamed, because they don't want to believe their loved ones could betray them, or because they don't know they have legal recourse. What if we created something to help them? A foundation that provides legal education, resources, and support for seniors facing financial exploitation. The idea resonated immediately. This was what I needed. A way to transform my pain into purpose. A way to honor Frank's memory by protecting others the way his careful planning had protected me. Over the next 6 months, Patricia and I worked with Lawrence to establish the Secure Legacies Foundation. We funded it initially with $500,000 of my money and $200,000 of Patricia's. The foundation's mission was threefold: educate seniors about financial exploitation and how to protect themselves, provide free legal consultation for victims of elder abuse, and advocate for stronger laws protecting seniors' assets. Lawrence agreed to serve as the foundation's legal director, providing his expertise pro bono. Jennifer joined the board, bringing her background in nonprofit management. We recruited other professionals, financial advisors, geriatric specialists, psychologists who understood the unique vulnerabilities of elderly adults. The foundation launched quietly, with a small office in Charleston and a website explaining our services. We didn't expect much immediate response. We were wrong. Within the first month, we received over 200 calls and emails from seniors who were experiencing or suspected financial exploitation. The stories were heartbreaking. Children stealing from parents, caregivers forging signatures, financial advisors manipulating vulnerable clients. Each story was a variation on the same theme: trust betrayed, security stolen, dignity violated. We couldn't help everyone, not at first, but we helped as many as we could. We provided legal referrals, helped people revoke fraudulent powers of attorney, assisted in filing police reports and lawsuits. We created educational materials explaining how to recognize financial exploitation and how to build protections. The work was exhausting and emotionally draining. Every case brought back memories of my own betrayal, my own pain. But it was also healing. Every person we helped, every dollar we recovered, every family we protected, it felt like I was taking the worst experience of my life and using it to create something good. A year after the foundation launched, we held our first annual fundraiser. Over 300 people attended, including many of the seniors we'd helped and their families. The event raised $200,000, allowing us to expand our services and hire additional staff. I gave a speech that night, standing at the podium in a room full of people who understood the pain of betrayal and the power of recovery. Many of you know my story. My grandson, the boy I raised, the child I loved as my own, stole over $1 million from me. He exploited my trust, my love, my grief over my husband's death. For months after I discovered what he'd done, I felt broken. I felt like I'd failed as a grandmother, as a guardian, as a human being. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? How could someone I loved so much care so little about me? But I've learned something important over this past year. What Blake did to me wasn't my failure, it was his. I didn't fail to see who he really was. He successfully deceived me, and there's a difference. Trusting people we love isn't weakness, it's human. What's weak is exploiting that trust for personal gain. The Secure Legacies Foundation exists because Patricia Morgan and I refuse to let our pain be wasted. We refuse to let the people who betrayed us have the final word. Every senior we help, every dollar we recover, every family we protect, that's our response to the betrayal. Not revenge, but purpose. Not bitterness, but action. The room erupted in applause. I saw tears on many faces, recognition of shared pain and shared determination. After the event, an elderly man approached me. He was 82, moving slowly with a cane. He introduced himself as William Harris. "Mrs. Lambert," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I want to thank you. 6 months ago, my daughter-in-law was pressuring me to sign over my house to her and my son. She said it was for tax purposes, that it would be easier for everyone. Something didn't feel right, but I didn't know what to do. I called your foundation. One of your attorneys reviewed the documents and explained that I would be giving away my home with no legal protections. I would have been homeless if my son decided to sell the house. You saved me." He pulled out a check and handed it to me. "This is a donation to the foundation, $10,000. It's my way of saying thank you and helping you save others the way." "You saved me." I looked at the check, tears blurring my vision. "Mr. Harris, this is incredibly generous. It's the least I can do. You gave me back my security, my independence, my home. That's worth more than money." After he walked away, I stood alone for a moment, the check in my hand, and I felt something I hadn't felt since before Blake's betrayal. Peace. Not happiness exactly. The wound was still too fresh for that, but peace. The sense that I'd found my path forward, that I'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and transformed it into something meaningful. The foundation continued to grow. By the end of the second year, we'd helped over 1,000 seniors. We'd recovered more than $5 million in stolen assets. We'd provided legal consultations to 3,000 people. We'd successfully lobbied for stronger penalties for elder financial abuse in South Carolina, and were working on similar legislation in other states. Patricia and I became close friends, bonded by shared experience and shared mission. We often joked that we were the most expensive friendship in history, having paid nearly $2 million combined for the education that taught us how to build the foundation. But we also recognized the privilege in that joke. We'd both had the resources to fight back, to hire attorneys to recover our losses. Most victims of elder abuse don't have those resources. That's why the foundation's work was so critical. 3 years after Blake's betrayal, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a woman who identified herself as a counselor at a drug rehabilitation facility in Georgia. "Mrs. Lambert, I'm calling about your grandson, Blake Lambert. He's been a patient here for the past 4 months. As part of his recovery program, he's been working on making amends to people he's harmed. He's asked if he could write you a letter. I'm calling to ask if you'd be willing to receive it." I was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Blake was in rehab. That implied addiction, though the counselor wouldn't specify what kind. It also implied that perhaps Blake had been more broken than evil, though I wasn't sure that distinction mattered. "I'll accept the letter," I said finally, "but I can't promise I'll respond. He understands that. Thank you, Mrs. Lambert." The letter arrived a week later. It was handwritten, 6 pages long, filled with Blake's familiar handwriting that I'd once found so charming when he'd sent me thank you notes for birthday gifts. Dear Grandma, I've started this letter 100 times and thrown it away 99 times. I don't know how to say what needs to be said. I'm sorry feels inadequate. I know you're wrong feels absurd. I destroyed our relationship feels true but incomplete. I'm in rehab, as you probably know, not for drugs or alcohol, though I've struggled with both. I'm here for gambling addiction. It started in college online poker. It escalated over the years until I was betting hundreds of thousands of dollars I didn't have. By the time I convinced you to give me power of attorney, I was $300,000 in debt to people who were threatening to hurt me if I didn't pay. That's not an excuse, it's just context. I could have come to you, told you the truth, asked for help, but I was ashamed. And more than that, I was angry. Angry that Grandpa had died and left you with all the money. Angry that I had to ask for things while you had millions. Angry that I'd been raised to think of myself as your heir, but had no actual access to that inheritance. Melissa fed that anger. She kept telling me I deserved the money, that it was practically mine anyway, that you were old and wouldn't miss it. She made theft feel like justice, but it wasn't justice, it was theft, it was betrayal. It was me taking advantage of the woman who raised me, who loved me unconditionally, who gave me every opportunity in life. And I destroyed that relationship for money I gambled away within months. The condo, gone. I took out mortgages against it to fund more gambling. The Tesla, repossessed before you even reclaimed it. The Vegas trips, all gambling. I was chasing wins that never came, trying to recoup losses that only grew. By the time you discovered what I'd done, I'd stolen everything from you and still ended up with nothing. The settlement you demanded was actually generous. It gave me a way to make restitution without going to prison. But I lost something more valuable than freedom. I lost you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it. I'm writing because my counselor says that making amends isn't about the other person accepting your apology. It's about taking responsibility for harm you've caused. So I take responsibility. I harmed you. I exploited your love, your trust, your grief. I stole your security and your peace of mind. I behaved like a stranger, not a grandson, and I'm sorry, truly, deeply, hopelessly sorry. I've heard about the foundation you started. I read an article about it in a magazine here at the rehab center. I'm proud of you, Grandma. Even after what I did to you, you found a way to help others. That's who you've always been, someone who takes pain and transforms it into purpose. I don't know what the future holds for me. I'm trying to get better, to understand why I made the choices I made, to become someone worthy of the chances I was given. I'll probably never see you again, I understand that. But I wanted you to know that I remember who you were to me before I destroyed everything. You were my hero. You were my home. You were the person who loved me when no one else did. I'm sorry I wasn't worthy of that love. I'm sorry I threw it away, and I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to understand what I'd lost. Blake, I read the letter 3 times. Each reading brought a different emotion. The first reading, anger. The second, sadness. The third, something more complicated. Understanding, perhaps, though not forgiveness. Not yet. I showed the letter to Lawrence, to Jennifer, to Patricia. They all had different reactions. Lawrence was skeptical. Addicts are very good at crafting narratives that excuse their behavior. Gambling addiction is real, but it doesn't absolve him of responsibility. Be careful, Dorothy. Jennifer was more sympathetic. He's trying, Aunt Dorothy. That has to count for something. You don't have to forgive him or let him back into your life, but maybe acknowledging his attempt to make amends gives you both closure. Patricia was the most pragmatic. The question isn't whether Blake deserves forgiveness. The question is whether forgiving him, on whatever terms you choose, gives you peace. Only you can answer that. I thought about it for weeks, and finally I wrote back. Not a long letter, not an absolution, but an acknowledgement. Blake, I received your letter. I appreciate you taking responsibility for what you did. Addiction is a powerful force, and I hope you're getting the help you need. I can't offer you forgiveness right now. The pain is still too fresh, the betrayal too deep, but I can offer you something else. Recognition of your humanity. You made terrible choices, but you're not a terrible person. You're someone who got lost, who made decisions that hurt people you loved, who valued money over relationships. That was wrong, but it doesn't mean you're beyond redemption. I hope you continue your recovery. I hope you find a way to build a life you can be proud of. I hope you learn to value the right things, people over money, integrity over convenience, truth over comfort. We won't see each other again. That door is closed, and it needs to stay closed for my own peace of mind. But I don't hate you, Blake. I'm disappointed in you. I'm hurt by you, but I don't hate you. Take care of yourself. Grandma, I mailed the letter and felt a weight lift. Not forgiveness exactly, but release. I'd said what needed to be said. Blake's journey from here was his own. The foundation continued to flourish. By the 5th year, we'd expanded to 3 states, helping thousands of seniors annually. We'd influenced legislation in 7 states, strengthening penalties for elder financial abuse and creating better legal protections for vulnerable adults. I continued to work with the foundation, though I stepped back from day-to-day operations as I approached 77. Patricia retired fully, spending her time traveling and enjoying the security we'd both fought to reclaim. Jennifer took over as executive director, bringing fresh energy and new ideas. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch, the same porch where I'd sat so many evenings with Frank, when a car pulled into my driveway. A young woman got out, perhaps 25 years old, with a confident walk and warm smile. "Mrs. Lambert," she asked, "I'm Emily Harris, William Harris's granddaughter. He passed away last month, and in his will, he left a letter for you." William Harris, the man who donated $10,000 at our first fundraiser, the man we'd helped protect his home from his exploitative daughter-in-law. "I'm so sorry for your loss," I said. "Your grandfather was a good man." Emily handed me an envelope. "He talked about you all the time. He called you his guardian angel. He wanted you to have this." I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in William's shaky handwriting and a check for $100,000 made out to the Secure Legacies Foundation. "Dear Dorothy, if you're reading this, I've passed on to whatever comes next. I hope it's a place where I can see my wife again and thank the people who made my final years secure and dignified. You were one of those people." When I called your foundation, I was terrified. I was about to lose my home, the house where my wife and I raised our children, where we celebrated 50 anniversaries and countless holidays. My own family was going to take it from me. You stopped that from happening. More than that, you taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, that protecting yourself isn't selfish. That family should be a source of support, not exploitation. I've enclosed a donation to the foundation. It's a fraction of what you saved for me, but it's my way of ensuring that other seniors get the help I received. Keep fighting the good fight, Dorothy. Keep transforming pain into purpose. With deepest gratitude, William Harris. I held the letter, tears streaming down my face. This was why the work mattered. This was the legacy that counted. Not the money Blake had stolen and I'd recovered, but the security William had retained, the dignity he'd preserved, the final years he'd spent in his own home surrounded by real family, not exploiters. Emily sat beside me on the porch. "Mrs. Lambert," she said softly, "I want you to know something. After what happened with my aunt trying to take Grandpa's house, our whole family changed. We had hard conversations about values, about what really matters. My aunt went to therapy, addressed her own financial issues, and eventually apologized to Grandpa. They reconciled before he died. That wouldn't have happened without your foundation forcing us all to confront what was really going on. So the work you do, it doesn't just protect seniors. It forces families to face hard truths. Sometimes that means permanent separation, like with you and your grandson, but sometimes it means healing. Either way, it means honesty, and honesty is what families need most." Her words stayed with me long after she left. The foundation wasn't just about recovering stolen money or punishing abusers. It was about creating accountability, forcing truth into situations built on exploitation and lies. Sometimes that truth destroyed relationships, but sometimes it saved them. I thought about Blake, somewhere in Georgia, presumably still in recovery, still trying to rebuild his life. I thought about the relationship we'd had and the relationship we'd never have again. And I realized that while I mourned the loss, I didn't regret the choice. Some relationships can't survive the truth, and that's okay. It's sad, but it's okay. As I approached 80 years old, I found myself reflecting more on legacy. What would I leave behind? The foundation, certainly. The house, which would be sold, and the proceeds donated to continue the foundation's work. The scholarship fund I'd established in Frank and Rebecca's names. These were tangible legacies, measurable impacts. But the less tangible legacy mattered too. The seniors I'd met, the stories I'd heard, the strength I'd witnessed in people facing their worst betrayals and choosing to fight back. That was the real legacy. The ripple effects of one woman refusing to be a victim, choosing instead to be a voice for those without one. The foundation held a celebration for my 80th birthday. I hadn't wanted a fuss, but Jennifer insisted, calling it less a birthday party and more a celebration of impact. Over 500 people attended, including many of the seniors we'd helped over the years. They shared stories. A 73-year-old man who'd recovered $200,000 stolen by his nephew. A 68-year-old woman who'd successfully revoked a fraudulent power of attorney orchestrated by her son-in-law. An 85-year-old widower who'd kept his home, thanks to legal intervention after his daughter tried to force him into a nursing home so she could sell the property. Each story was a testament not to me, but to the power of refusing to accept exploitation as inevitable, to the strength of people who'd been betrayed but chose to fight back, to the importance of structure, legal protections, and community support. At the end of the evening, Jennifer presented me with a leather-bound book. Inside were letters from over 2,000 people the foundation had helped over 10 years. Messages of gratitude, stories of survival, expressions of hope. I took the book home and spent the next week reading every letter. Some made me cry, some made me laugh. All of them reminded me that the worst thing that ever happened to me, Blake's betrayal and theft, had become the catalyst for the best work of my life. Frank had been right all those years ago. Structure is security. Legal protections matter, but he taught me something else too, something I'd only fully understood through my own journey of betrayal and recovery. The real security isn't in the money or the legal documents or the protected assets. The real security is in knowing who you are, what you value, and what you're willing to fight for. Blake had tried to take my money. He'd succeeded for a while, but he'd never been able to take the things that truly mattered: my integrity, my strength, my determination, my capacity to transform pain into purpose. Those things were mine and mine alone, and they were the real inheritance Frank had left me, not the $4 million in carefully structured trusts, but the wisdom to know that wealth means nothing if you don't know who you are. As I approached the end of my life, I could look back with satisfaction, not because everything had turned out perfectly. Blake and I would never reconcile. That relationship was gone, destroyed by his choices and my boundaries. But I'd survived the destruction. I'd rebuilt. I'd found new purpose and new meaning. The foundation would continue long after I was gone. Jennifer would lead it with passion and wisdom. The work would expand, reaching more people, protecting more families, creating more accountability. That was the legacy that mattered. And maybe somewhere Blake was building his own recovery, finding his own redemption. I hope so, not for my sake, but for his. Everyone deserves the chance to become better than their worst moment. But whether he did or didn't, whether he found peace or continued to struggle, my peace no longer depended on his journey. I'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes family means walking away. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is save yourself and then use that salvation to save others. That was the real ending to my story. Not revenge, not bitterness, not even forgiveness. Just the quiet strength of a woman who'd been betrayed, who'd fought back, and who'd transformed her pain into a legacy that would protect thousands of people she'd never meet. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.